Welcome to the Express News preseason rundown, where we're talking about the season ahead of our UPickem contest, sponsored by Affordable Debt Consolidation. I'm your host, sports editor Nick Talbot. I'm joined by beat writer Nick Moyle and beat writer Greg Luca. We're going to talk a little bit of Texas today. We're going to talk a little about UTSA. Greg, talk to me a little bit about UTSA this season. Obviously, they have a lot of momentum going from last year with Jeff Traylor taking them to 12-1 season last year. 12-2?
12-2 if you count the bowl game, yeah.
12-2 if we count the bowl game. Of course, we got to count that. But, you know, a fantastic season with their best ever, led by quarterback Frank Harris. What do they have to do this season to repeat that? Can they repeat that with their ridiculously tough preseason schedule? Yeah,
I don't think the record is going to be able to be the same, but they've talked a lot during the preseason about this concept of whether the program is built to last. And that has a lot to do with, you know, the infrastructure around the program and the different things that lead to winning year after year. And in a very coach speak fashion, Coach Traylor and the players have talked about whether the wins and losses each week are not the determining factor in how they feel about their program and their level of success. It's about how well they play to their brand and their culture and, you know, the kind of things you would expect football coaches to preach. And I think that there's a lot of buy-in to that. And whether they're able to translate that into the wins and losses each week, like you said, will be a lot tougher, opening with Houston and then Army and then Texas all in a row. 3 very, very tough games that could see UTSA sitting 0-3, although there's a good chance they'll be competitive in all of them too. So who knows how it could play out.
There's a good chance they'll be 3-0. Speaking of that, Texas, that third game of the season, they aren't coming off that good momentum that UTSA has in Moyle.
No, pretty much opposite side of the coin, honestly. They have a lot of recruiting momentum, but they haven't signed those guys yet. And if they go through another 5-7 season, I have a feeling Arch Manning and his boys aren't going to want to come to Austin anymore. So honestly, I could see Texas riding in 1-2 because you start with Louisiana Monroe, which would kind of be an easy kind of get right game for them. Then you have Alabama coming to town in week 2, and then you have a really tough game against UTSA. That just got a lot harder because Texas lost its most experienced offensive lineman. It lost Isaiah Nair, who they brought in from Wyoming, all Mountain West guy. Would have been a great piece next to Jordan Whittington and Xavier Worthy. I think losing those two guys is really, really going to hurt Texas. They're kind of scrambling now to figure out how they're going to replace them. They could very well start week 1 with 3 true freshmen on the offensive line, which, yeah, this is the best offensive line recruiting class they've ever had, but you don't want to start that many inexperienced guys in college week 1. But they really might not have any other options. So honestly, I think that UTSA game actually got a lot more juicy now because I don't think Texas has as many weapons to kind of roll out against UTSA, especially in the secondary. I think Nair would have been a real issue for them to try to stop him. But now they can kind of hone in on Worthy and Whittington, stack the box against Bijan, kind of put some pressure on those young offensive linemen. So this is going to be a really trying season for Sark in year 2 and trying to get this team right, trying to get the momentum built, trying to get to where UTSA is right now, which is a crazy thing. I can't believe we're even saying that. I mean, like, honestly, they'd kill to have UTSA's quarterback. They'd love to have a lot of the guys that UTSA has right now, which is insane. And I think that's probably one of the most underrated matchups, maybe outside of Texas, heading into this, this preseason. So it's going to be a really interesting season in Austin, as it always is. And it's hard to say where they're going to be because we don't even know who their starting quarterback is right now. And
I was just about to say, a big contrast here is we absolutely know who UTSA's starting quarterback. It's Frank Harris. Texas, how did they look yesterday? I mean, they just had a
not good.
Not good.
No, I mean, look, they both had moments. I mean, both of these guys were obviously Quinn Ewers was only one of like 5 guys to get a perfect quarterback rating from 24/7 Sports, along with Vince Young and a couple other guys. And Hudson Card was a really highly rated recruit out of Lake Travis. He's only in his 3rd year now. Obviously, he won the job last year, gave that up after week 2. He just wasn't really ready. And honestly, the offensive line play didn't help him out. They lost a lot of guys last year too. You really only had one wide receiver who had more than 30 receptions and 400 yards, and Xavier Worthy. That was a tough kind of situation for him to be placed in, and I think Sark probably should have started Casey Thompson. So I think that's why a lot of people were so down on Hudson headed into the season. But he's pushed Quinn, and Quinn hasn't really done anything to separate himself yet. They both made some really good throws in the open scrimmage the other day. Unfortunately, we haven't had that many open practice windows because they're pretty tight-knit with that sort of stuff.
Shocking.
Shocking with UT. But right now, honestly, Sark is not ready to name a starting quarterback, and I don't think he will be as early as he wanted to. I think he would have really loved to name somebody this week. Last year, he waited until the Friday before the start of the start of the season. He might have to wait that long again because neither guy is really gaining separation right now.
All right. The one starting quarterback, we do know it's Frank Harris, but what about the other positions at UTSA? Where are they having to fill the gaps? Obviously, they lost Sincere McCormick at running back. They got some replacements in the defense as well. Who are they having to look for to step up this year that kind of filled some of the holes that excelled on the field last year?
Yeah, we can start on the offense. And like you mentioned, Frank Harris will be the centerpiece, of course. And I thought he was in a lot of ways the centerpiece and the driving force last year, even though Sincere McCormick got a lot of the accolades. Frank's improvement just with his accuracy and his timing, the ability to make some of these sideline throws that we hadn't seen him make earlier in his career has been really impressive to watch his development. And Coach Jeff Traylor said Frank's the most improved quarterback he's ever coached. And you can see it on the field. The running back situation is a little bit of a question mark, but they shored it up pretty well during the offseason. Brendan Brady came back for a fifth year after initially saying he was done with football. And they brought in Traylon Smith, the transfer from Arkansas, and they brought in a really good JUCO prospect in Ty Edwards. So I think they'll be able to piece that together. And that's really the only question mark on that side, because at wide receiver, they bring back their top three guys with Zachary Franklin, Joshua Cephas, and DeCorian Clark, who all bring a little bit of different things to the table, but have all proven to be really effective. And they have most of the starters back on the offensive line. They just have to replace one in Spencer Burford, and it looks like the guy's going to be Demetrius Allen, and he played the role a little bit last year and has some experience under his belt as well. So offensively, I think they can move the ball with anybody, and even against a team like Texas, I think they'll be able to generate some offense and put up some points.
They will. Yeah.
So we think this UTSA Texas game is actually going to be good. Like you started that, like what? When did they book this game? A couple years ago?
It was,
years out.
It was when Frank Wilson was still at UTSA and things were not looking as promising as they are now.
That was definitely looking like a game where UTSA was looking just to take the check and make some money, which is what these games, which a lot of those games are for.
100%. They signed up to play 5 straight in Austin, so that tells you a lot about the dynamics there, where they were just willing to take the paycheck not 5 straight years, but 5 straight games through 2031 or whatever it was, and just, take the 5 losses and call it a day.
And now we're sitting here talking, it looks like, this could be a toss-up game.
100%. I mean, especially because Texas is probably going to be coming off a pretty lopsided loss to Alabama in week 2, unless they really shock the world. And, if either Ewers or Card proves to be a lot more than what we see in the preseason, there's a trillion ifs you can go through. And I just don't think this Texas team is ready to fight against Alabama right now. And they're going to be probably a little bit injured, wounded, pride hurt coming off that Bama game. They're back in their home stadium, but you have UTSA coming up, I think they're probably going to have a pretty good contingent of fans up there, probably out in the tailgate lots too. I think it's going to be a really fascinating game. And like I said, with the recent injuries that Texas has suffered, I think that leaves the door open for UTSA not to just be competitive, but to potentially go in and win a game in DKR. Because hell, if Kansas can go and win in DKR, I think UTSA, which is a better team than Kansas, can do the same thing.
I don't want to set the bar too high for UTSA. I think Texas is still a significant favorite in the game, just based on the overall level of talent that they have. And Texas is going to be coming off the game against Alabama, but UTSA is coming off a road game at Army, which is not the same level of team, but will take the same kind of physical toll on you, really, as any team in the country, to go up against that kind of an option offense and all the other things that they do with their toughness and physicality at Army. So they're not going to be 100% either. The game's going to mean more to UTSA, but I think the real deciding factor will likely be that UTSA's defense has never had to play against or tackle skill players with the level of talent and athleticism that Texas is going to bring to the table. Like, they have never faced a guy like Bijan Robinson, and they what it's going to take to slow him down or keep him from running for 6 yards a carry.
Yeah, well, that's a game where I think, honestly, they probably hand it off to Bijan 25, 30 times. And also with the stable running backs they have. And like I said, if those offensive linemen that they have are really kind of doing well and progressing, I think that's going to be probably the toughest matchup for UTSA to kind of get through those linemen and to get Bijan down, to get Roshan Johnson down, to get Jonathan Brooks down. I mean, they really have they go 5 running backs deep, honestly. All of them bring a little bit something different to the table. Even Jordan Whittington's been shown capable of running the ball every now and then. You had Roshan Johnson run Wildcat every now and then. I mean, that could even be something we see a little bit. I mean, he ran for like almost 200 yards in the season finale last year when Casey Thompson was out and Hudson Card was banged up. So they have a ton of weapons. And if that offensive line is even average, or if the freshmen are as good as they're advertised, you have 2 5-star freshmen that are probably going to start in Kelvin Banks and DJ Campbell, and then Cole Hudson, the early enrollee, who got a little banged up, but Sark said he's going to be available for week 1. Then you have Jake Majors, sophomore center in the middle, and then Christian Jones, your 5th-year guy, on the outside. So they're big boys. There's some experience there. And like you said, UTSA is, proved capable of stopping good guys before, but Bijan's a little bit of a different beast.
Yeah, so I could see this game, and a lot will change in the next month or so, but if I had to pick it right now, I would say it's some Texas wins, some like 55-38, some really high scoring game, but Texas probably just has too much firepower.
Yeah.
Well, that should be entertaining at least.
It definitely will be fun.
I don't have any doubt about that, because I think the fans from both sides will be pretty into it. Texas is probably more scared, and UTSA is probably more hopeful.
Yeah.
All right. Both these teams are also going to be making transitions in their future. A lot happened in the offseason with college football. Let's talk about that a little bit. Obviously, UTSA changing conferences, Texas, Oklahoma. How does that kind of change the landscape for these teams going forward? Because they're both trying to build towards something, but they're also trying to build towards something different.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially, with the SEC, Texas and Sark got a taste of it last year when they went to Arkansas and they got bullied. Both their offensive and defensive lines were just overwhelmed by the Razorbacks, who have always been, decent, but not, they're not Bama, they're not Georgia, they're not a top tier SEC team. So that was really eye-opening. But I don't think Sark was surprised by that, because literally his first meeting with Del Conte, even before he was hired, he said, we need to get some offensive linemen in here. And they did that. They signed 7 offensive linemen in this last class, their 2022 class. They have a lot of defensive linemen coming in the 2023 class. They're trying to stock their numbers there because they really need it. I mean, last year they had one of the worst pass rushes, not just in the country, but in the entire history of their school. Their secondary wasn't very good either, but I think a lot of that had to do with the quarterbacks having so much time to sit in the pocket and relax and go through their reads. So for Sark, he's trying to build the numbers in the trenches on both sides, and they've done a good job with that. Now, obviously, there are some NIL deals. If you're an offensive lineman on scholarship at Texas, you can also get $50,000 a year from one of these Horns with Hearts programs. So that's probably helping in the recruitment a little bit. But at the same time, it's also Texas. It's also SEC. I mean, there's everything they send out to recruits now. SEC branding is all over it. It's got Bijan Robinson as Lambo. You have SEC trademarks all over the place. So they're really not selling the Big 12 anymore. They're ready to move on to the SEC. And Sark has been planning for that even before he got here. And you can see it in the way that they're recruiting just compared to past years. And now that they're dipping in more to the SEC land in recruiting, they just got a really good running back out of Florida who was considering, Georgia, Bama, even Miami. But, they're winning guys that they wouldn't have in the past. Now, if they falter this year, a lot of those guys might back out because they can't sign until December. But right now, Sark's recruiting in the way that he wants to recruit to build towards that SEC. So they're actually ready and not totally overwhelmed when they make the move in either 2024 or 2025.
And for UTSA going to the American Athletic Conference from Conference USA, it's a lot of the same talking points, just obviously at a much lower level. Jeff Traylor has said through this offseason that their infrastructure is sort of near the top of Conference USA, and they had reached a really good point with that. When he signed his 10-year contract extension last year, they had built in things for assistant coaches and support staff, and even all the way down on things like nutrition in areas that he felt they were lacking. And so they had built it up to a point where they felt really good about where they are in Conference USA, but in the American, they're going to slide back down to the middle of the pack. It's sort of their understanding at this point. And, it's not like they're going to be completely out of place because half of the Conference USA is moving over there. It's a lot of teams that they're going to be used to facing, but there's also going to be some of these bigger programs that it's going to be a little bit of a step up to compete with them. And part of that comes down to the NIL conversation, as always, and UTSA has their Runners Rising Collective, and it sounds like there's another sort of nonprofit in the works, maybe involving some of the program's bigger money donors that might be able to start to generate some more positive momentum in that way. But it still sort of remains to be seen what the baseline is to remain competitive in the American Athletic Conference, like what all the other schools are doing and able to offer in a similar way, as well as how UTSA can get their own situation off the ground, given that still a relatively young program and maybe the alumni base isn't all the way there the way it is for some of these other programs to have a lot of, high earning football supporters or even former players who have made it to the big time and might want to give back. There's a lot of those things that are still kind of under development and not all the way there from a resource perspective. So it's going to be a work in progress for them to try to get ready to keep up in the AAC, and it'll be interesting to see where they fit in once that actually happens. Yeah.
Speaking of NIL deals, that's kind of completely changed the landscape of college football. Why is it completely messed up, and how is it terrible, and how is it great? I mean, it's great in some ways, because
everyone's getting the Coldest Crawford air conditioning commercial.
Right, yes.
Yeah, so it's the case is closed. NIL is terrific. That was incredible.
100%.
Yeah,
I think we need to show everyone that.
Yeah,
spice it in.
Spice it in, guys. Spice it in.
But yeah, I mean, It's weird because now everything's over the table, you know. It's like, obviously we knew that, you know, things have been happening for years and years under the table. I mean, hell, you know, UT just had a tennis coach that went to jail for, you know, 6 months or whatever a few years ago because he got caught up in that whole
For tennis,
I know. And if he just waited a couple years, it would have been fine because you could pay him now. But no, I mean, I think it's really interesting because I think people believe that it's going to benefit places like Texas so much more than the other schools. But I actually think it opens the door for places like UTSA, because now you have guys that can go there that maybe they look at Texas and say, you know, well, I'd go there. I don't know if I would ever play there. But now you can look at like UTSA and say, hey, I can go there and maybe I'll have a clearer path to rising on the depth chart. And also, maybe if I become a star at that place, I can get these local deals. I can sign NIL deals. So I think it's actually kind of benefiting them more. Now, obviously, UTSA doesn't have a program where they're going to pay every scholarship offensive lineman $50,000 just because UT's alumni base is outrageous and out of control. I mean, they just finished their $175 million renovations at DKR, which look awesome, and that's going to entice more recruits. But I don't know if it changes, I guess, the calculus for a lot of guys, like especially for like someone like Arch Manning. Like he could go anywhere. He could go to Texas State, and it wouldn't matter because his name is his name. And you have a lot of guys especially in the states that allow NIL, obviously not Texas, that you can already have deals when you're in high school. So I think that changes the calculus for a lot of guys too. But I don't know how much it necessarily changes it at Texas. Or any of those bigger places. But I guess we're going to see if the NCAA decides to legislate this at all, or just going to stay hands off, because obviously they just kind of let this turn into the wild, wild west.
Yeah, we could do an hour on this, but just to hit some of the high points, I think Nick raises a really good point. And I thought about this with UTSA's guys, somebody like Frank Harris, where I don't know what kind of a role he would have had coming into a bigger program, some Power 5 school, or even a place like Texas initially. But certainly here in San Antonio, he's a little bit more recognizable and already has some name value. And so he is probably more likely to be able to profit off of who he is here versus a lot of other places. And what does that mean for being able to keep some of the top athletes in your area home and at your school, if that allows them to better capitalize on those opportunities? But I think talking to Traylor about this, a lot of what he wants to see is that the athletes on the team who are producing and are doing all the right things are able to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness to be able to make a little bit of extra money. And what he doesn't want to see is that this is a path to recruiting and that you have to be able to make all these offers up front, because that's just not, they haven't really earned it in a lot of ways in the same sense as the guys who are already in place. And there's a lot of unknowns with doing that. And then what does it mean for the guys who are already on the roster? The fact that this is still kind of getting transitioned into being the way that things are done. If there's a system down the line where everybody on the roster is making a certain amount and then new guys coming in are also making a certain amount, then at least there's some equity there. But we're starting at a point where you feel like these programs feel like they have to pay to get all the recruits in. But then there's a bunch of guys on the roster who have proven it and have been there longer, and they're saying, well, where's mine? And then it becomes a whole ordeal in that sense. But generally, I think the easiest way to describe it is I think Traylor and probably a lot of other coaches around college football don't even necessarily have an issue with the way the rules are written and how it's established right now. It's an enforcement issue because there's nothing really being done to prevent these recruiting inducements that everybody knows is happening that are technically against the rules.
Right. And that's the thing too, because the programs and the coaches don't really have control over it because it's the boosters and the donors. And, there's certainly coaches that, are affiliated and they're happy that, these groups are springing up and doing NIL deals. But a lot of them also are kind of saying, hey, this is my team. Like, you don't recruit guys to my program. I recruit guys to my program. So I think there's a little bit of a issue there. There's going to be a divide. There's always been a divide between coaches and boosters at a lot of places, but I think this is kind of going to widen that a little bit more. And you almost are going to have these, alumni who kind of are going to act as general managers in their own mind. They're saying, hey, I can get these guys here. And, what if I can get Quinn Ewers to Texas? Or what if I can get the next great quarterback to Texas by offering him the same deal that Bijan Robinson got with the Lamborghini. Quinn Ewers is driving around in Aston Martin. So, guys see that and their probably eyes get wide, especially if you're a high school student. You go on campus and you see these guys riding around in these luxury, automobiles, and, they have really nice suits and they have all of these deals and you see them on TV. And I think it's easy for guys to get really enamored with that. And I think that's the one thing that the coaches are probably a little bit worried about and say, hey, that's awesome. We want you guys to do that. on your own, but we also want you to come here and play football. It's not just about coming here to get the endorsements. You're on scholarship here to play football, and everything else is extra. And, I've talked to guys like Bijan about that, and Xavier Worthy, who I think he just signed a Fortnite deal. So he's doing stuff with them. Yeah, Fortnite. Yeah. Fortnite. Him and yours are doing Fortnite gaming, I think, together, which is awesome. I mean, there's a ton of opportunities, and I think it's really cool at the way they've done it, set up, this open doors thing where you can go and contact UT athletes. But I think there's definitely going to be a little bit of a back and forth between, the programs and the boosters and donors, unless there's some real way to legislate. Just like Greg was saying, I mean, right now there's really no mechanisms in place. Who's monitoring, who's giving the money, where it's coming from? Are they actually doing anything that they're saying they're supposed to be doing for this money, or is it really just essentially a salary to pay for the team? And those the NCAA just doesn't have the enforcement. Either that or they don't care. I mean, it's the NCAA, so who knows with them? But yeah, it's really strange right now, and I'm curious to see kind of how they're going to deal with it. But for right now, I mean, it's awesome for the players. I know the coaches are probably a little bit not thrilled with it, but that's what it is.
We haven't published this yet, but Jeff Traylor told me that in a lot of ways it's like call your own fouls and how that would work in an NBA game, which I thought was a very funny analogy. But it's interesting to see where it'll go from here, because I don't even know that in a general sense that having it as a recruiting inducement, or that what you're getting up front, is even necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a lot of people, just the general public coming out of high school, will make a decision about their next step based on salary and location and opportunity for advancement. And you're just giving college athletes the ability to weigh all the same factors that the general populace weighs when they make decisions about their future. So I don't know where it's going to head from here, or if it's how it's going to play out and how it'll change, and if it'll even continue to be differentiated state by state, which is a whole other can of worms. But I think it'll just be interesting to watch and see how it develops.
Well, speaking of Lamborghinis and Aston Martins, if you play our UPickem, no, I'm kidding. We do have weekly prizes, so I want to encourage everyone to go play our UPickem contest this year. We'll have weekly prizes on there. You can go there on expressnews.com/UPickem and pick the games, and you can try to be smarter than Greg or me or Nick Moyle over here. Or well, they're going to beat me. That's
yeah. I don't know how hard that's going to be on my end, but all right.
It's going to be some college games and a couple NFL games. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, we're going to pick some college games every week. We're going to pick the UTSA games, the Texas games, the A&M games, and we're going to pick the Cowboys, of course, and whether or not they win or lose, or Dak Prescott implodes and Jerry Jones loses his mind, or if the Houston Texans wins any game whatsoever. That's probably your best bet. Just don't pick the Houston Texans at all this year. I'm going to pick them. I'm not picking them. I'm going to tell you ahead of time. I'm going to go 0-6, 0-17 Houston Texans.
I respect that.
I'm sure a lot of people are going to be mad about that, but if you disagree with me, go to the website and pick against me, and maybe you can win some weekly prizes. Before we wrap up, we're going to hear from Texas A&M football beat writer Brent Zerneman. We're going to talk to him about the Aggies' chances this season and if they can maybe win a national championship. They're ranked number 6 coming into the season.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Yes, Texas A&M, just like last year, starts the season at number 6. And actually, at that time last year, I picked an upset of Alabama. What I didn't pick is for the Aggies to lose to Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Arkansas and LSU along the way.